If you had told me 2 years ago that my parents would show up at my apartment, eyes red, hands shaking, begging me to come home because my perfect sister had blown up her entire life, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, I was the disappointment, the difficult one, the sensitive one, the daughter who didn't live up to her potential. My name is Riley. I'm 25, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep of my family. My older sister, Emma, 28, has always been the golden one, the success story, the proof that my parents were good at raising children. She was the cheer captain, the Ivy League law student, the high-powered attorney in the city. I was the kid who spent lunch in the art room and went to a state school to study illustration. They bragged about her at every dinner party. They rolled their eyes when I mentioned my sketchbook. A year ago, I packed my life into the trunk of my car and drove away from their house after one final dinner where my mom told me to get a real job, and my sister kindly offered to get me something entry level at her law firm. I remember the sound of my suitcase wheels on the tile, my dad's jaw clenched, my mother's voice shrill with threats. If you leave now, Riley, don't expect us to help you when you can't pay rent. Emma just stood there in the hallway, arms crossed, lips curved, in that tiny smug smile she's perfected since we were kids. I drove off anyway, heart pounding, hands slippery on the steering wheel. I was terrified, but also weirdly free. For months I struggled. Tiny studio, 2 jobs, ramen for dinner. But my art, my ridiculous, unstable art career, started to grow roots. One children's book, then another, an email here, a commission there. Slowly, quietly, my life began to look less like a failure and more like mine. And then, almost a year after I left, my phone lit up with my mother's name. When she sat down across from me at a cafe, eyes swollen and fingers twisting the paper napkin, the first words out of her mouth weren't another lecture. They were a confession. Emma, the untouchable golden child, the pride of the family, had been fired in disgrace. In a single breath, my mother shattered every story I'd been told about who we were, who I was, and what it meant to be the disappointing child. That was the day I realized walking away hadn't ruined my life. It had saved it. And this is how it all started. I used to think childhood favoritism was something exaggerated in movies, something therapists talked about, something dramatic families whispered about behind closed doors. But in my house, favoritism wasn't whispered. It was baked into the walls. I was born 3 years after Emma, and from the moment I could walk, I was compared to her. Emma learned to read early. Emma made friends easily. Emma won her first spelling bee at 7. And then there was me, quiet, artistic, anxious Riley. I colored outside the lines. I cried when adults raised their voices. I preferred drawing in the corner over playing tag in a crowd. My father would sigh when he saw my messy sketches. My mother would tilt her head and say, "You're trying, honey," as though trying was somehow shameful. Meanwhile, Emma walked into every room like the light followed her. By the time she was in high school, she was captain of the cheer squad, homecoming queen, and a straight-A student. My parents attended every game, every performance, every award ceremony. They bought her flowers, balloons, glittering cards. They built her a pedestal so high I had to squint to see her. Me? I kept my head down in the art room, blending watercolors while listening to my classmates laugh at something I'd never be included in. I wasn't miserable, I just didn't exist in the same world as Emma. At dinner, I'd show them a drawing I was proud of. Emma would show them a test score. Guess which one got hung on the fridge? "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Emma never gave us this kind of trouble. "Maybe art can be a hobby, Riley, not a career." Their words used to sting. Later they scarred. How I met the first love of my life, art. Unlike Emma, who thrived in crowds, I found refuge in solitude. Art became my language when speaking felt dangerous. I would lose myself in colors, lines, and composition, my sketchbook filling up with scenes of imaginary worlds where no one compared me to anyone else. Teachers noticed. A few even encouraged me. But at home, my interest was an inconvenience. When I told my parents I wanted to apply to art programs, they didn't yell. Sometimes quiet disappointment hurts worse. My mom pressed her lips together, tapping her manicured nails on the table. My dad stared at his coffee as though wishing I'd change my mind through telepathy. And Emma, perfect, polished Emma, gave me a pitying smile. "Are you sure that's a good idea, Riley? Art school isn't practical." She said it gently, as if she actually cared. But I could hear the subtext. "It'll just prove them right about you." Still, I applied, and when the acceptance letter came, I cried alone in my room because I already knew my parents wouldn't celebrate. Emma goes Ivy League, I go state school. When Emma was accepted to her Ivy League dream school, my parents acted like she'd been chosen by God Himself. They threw a dinner party. They posted about it online. They even bought her a sapphire necklace for the occasion. When I told them my final choice, a state university with a strong art program, my mother's eyes welled with disappointed tears. "We just want what's best for you," she whispered, which always meant, "Be more like Emma." Emma chimed in again. "You can always switch majors later if it doesn't work out." I remember swallowing my frustration, tasting metal. I remember telling myself their doubt wasn't truth. And thank God I didn't listen to them. College was the first place where I wasn't the family disappointment. Surrounded by artists, I finally felt seen. I thrived. I made the dean's list multiple times. I stayed up late working on illustrations that made me feel alive. Every time I called home to share good news, "That's nice, dear," my mom would say before pivoting to Emma's internship, Emma's scholarship, Emma's boyfriend, Emma's future. It was like they didn't hear me, or worse, they didn't care to. Graduation and the diverging paths. Emma graduated with honors. She got a prestigious job at a top law firm. My parents visited her new apartment, paid her security deposit, helped furnish it. When I graduated, I stepped into a world of uncertainty. I juggled part-time work, freelance gigs, and commissions that paid barely enough to cover groceries. Whenever I came home for dinner, it was the same story. "Emma won another case. Emma's partner wants to mentor her. Emma might make senior associate soon." And when I dared to talk about a new illustration job, "But when are you getting a real job, Riley?" My father would fold his arms. My mother would press her lips thin. Emma would sip her wine and pretend she wasn't enjoying my humiliation. The boyfriend comparison. The worst was when I brought home my first serious boyfriend, a fellow art student who adored my passion for drawing. My parents didn't hide their disapproval. They grilled him about finances, future plans, and stability until his hands shook under the table. Meanwhile, Emma walked in 2 months later with her law school boyfriend, son of a wealthy family, and my parents almost rolled out a literal red carpet. My father opened wine he had been saving. My mother made Emma's favorite dessert. I remember watching that scene with a sinking feeling, realizing love wasn't enough if the family expected you to be someone else entirely. The seeds had been planted. I just didn't know they'd bloom into a storm. By the time I was 25, I felt like I had spent my entire life apologizing for who I was. I didn't know that everything would soon explode. One dinner, one comment, one smug smile from Emma, and I would finally break. But looking back now, maybe it wasn't a breaking. Maybe it was the beginning of saving myself. People think family tension is loud, that it comes from shouting matches or slamming doors. But in my house, tension was quieter, colder, like a draft you couldn't see, but always felt on your skin. The conflict didn't explode all at once. It simmered. Tiny cuts I learned to pretend didn't hurt. And Emma was always holding the knife with a smile. The early signs I ignored. After college, I moved back home to save money. I told myself it was temporary, just until I found stable freelance work. But the moment I unpacked my bags, the old patterns returned as if I'd never left. Emma visited almost every weekend. She breezed in wearing tailored coats and expensive perfume, her presence enough to send my parents into a frenzy of cleaning and menu planning. She'd hug them dramatically in the doorway. My mom would beam with pride. My dad would ask about her cases with the enthusiasm of a sports fan watching his favorite team. Then there was me, quiet, invisible, trying not to shrink in the shadow of her spotlight. But Emma didn't just outshine me. She pointed the spotlight where she wanted it. Whenever I shared something about my art, a small commission, a freelance job, a piece I'd sold, she had a way of responding that felt polite, but piercing. "That's adorable, Riley. You're still doing the illustration thing?" Or, "Well, as long as you're having fun, stability isn't for everyone." She always smiled when she said it, as if I should thank her for the insult. Mom's subtle jabs become less subtle. My mother had perfected the art of weaponized concern. If I slept in because I'd worked late on a project, "Honey, you'll never build a real career with such irregular habits." If I cooked dinner, "Emma makes this dish too, but hers has more flavor." If I wore anything remotely casual, "That's fine for now, but when you get a real job, you'll need nicer clothes." She always said it sweetly, voice light, eyes soft, like she was offering advice, not slicing me open. Emma would look at me sympathetically, as though she wasn't the standard I was constantly measured against. I started avoiding family meals, choosing instead to work in my room until the house grew quiet. But comparisons seep through walls. You can't hide from something that lives in the air. Dad's silence, the deepest wound. My father wasn't cruel. He wasn't sharp like my mother or smug like Emma. He was absent. Not physically. He sat at the table, watched TV, attended dinners. But emotionally, he was a ghost standing in plain sight. Whenever conversations turned painful for me, which was often, he just kept eating, or reading, or scrolling his phone. He never said, "Stop comparing them. Riley's accomplishments matter. Let her speak." He just let it happen. And sometimes silence hurts more than any criticism. The conversations that shifted the atmosphere. There were moments, small, forgettable to anyone else, that struck me like thunder. One afternoon, I was sketching at the dining table when Emma walked in wearing a crisp suit, hair perfect as always. She leaned over my shoulder. "Cute drawing," she murmured. "Have you thought about doing something more ambitious?" I asked what she meant. She shrugged lightly. "Well, art is fine when you're young, but eventually you'll want a grown-up career." My pencil paused midline. My mom, without looking up from her cooking, said, "She's right, Riley. Your sister knows the world." I put down my sketchbook, throat tight. It was a small comment, but it lingered for days. My love life didn't survive the comparisons either. I once brought home a guy I'd been seeing. He was gentle, creative, soft-spoken, an art student turned tattoo apprentice. My parents spent the entire dinner interrogating him. "How stable is your income? Do you have health insurance? Are you planning to get a real job eventually?" He left that night embarrassed. We broke up a week later. When Emma brought home a boyfriend, a law student from a wealthy family, my parents practically threw a gala. My dad poured wine he had been saving for a special occasion. My mom made crème brûlée from scratch. They toasted to them. I sat quietly at the table, feeling myself fold into something smaller. My sister's trips home became mini coronations. Whenever Emma came over, the whole house shifted. My mom cleaned for days. My dad ironed his shirt. They spoke about her as though she were royalty, visiting peasants. "Emma's coming this weekend. Let's make the house presentable." I lived there. Apparently my presence didn't count. And when Emma walked in, applause, praise, affection. I didn't know how to earn. I would hear them from the hallway. "We're so proud of you. You're doing everything right. You make us look good." Meanwhile, my achievements, quiet, creative, small, barely registered. The moment I realized something was deeply wrong. It wasn't one big insult. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even a dramatic moment. It was a Tuesday night. We were eating lasagna. Emma was talking about a big case she might get assigned. My parents were hanging on to every word. I waited for a pause. Just a pause, nothing more. When it came, I took a breath. "I signed my first children's book illustration contract today," I said quietly. "It's not huge, but..." My mom didn't even look up. "That's nice, dear, but Emma's case is a major opportunity. Emma, what were you saying about the judge?" My mouth went dry. My hands went numb. And for the first time, the disbelief I'd been swallowing for years turned into something else. Recognition. I wasn't overlooked. I was unwanted. And once that realization settled, the resentment began to grow roots. Their favoritism wasn't harmless. It wasn't just how families are. It wasn't something I could fix by being better. It was a system I was never meant to win. I didn't know then that everything was about to snap. That one dinner, one final dismissal would send me packing into the night. But the foundation was already cracking. All I needed was one more push. It started like every other family dinner, with Emma shining and me trying not to disappear. My parents had made her favorite meal again. Lemon herb chicken, roasted vegetables, and the garlic bread my mom only ever baked. When Emma was home, the house smelled warm and buttery, like celebration. Like not for me. Emma walked in wearing a soft beige coat, hair curled perfectly, makeup subtle and expensive looking. She kissed my mom on the cheek, hugged my dad, then glanced at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey, Riley, still working on your little art stuff?" A soft jab disguised as conversation. I swallowed it like I always did. We sat down to eat, and immediately, Emma launched into a story about her latest courtroom win. My parents clung to every word like she was giving a TED Talk. My dad nodded vigorously. My mom gasped at all the right moments. I cut my chicken into tiny pieces and reminded myself to breathe. The conversation lasted almost the entire meal. I kept waiting, hoping, for a lull, a chance to share my own news. My heart thudded with anticipation. I had just landed my most significant project ever, illustrating a full children's book series. It wasn't a massive paycheck, but it was real, meaningful, mine. Finally, a pause. My mom took a sip of water. Emma buttered her bread. My dad reached for the salt. This was my opening. I wiped my palms on my jeans and said, I have some news too. I got hired to illustrate a children's book series. It's a long-term project, and if it goes well, it could lead to more opportunities. I tried to control the excitement in my voice, tried not to sound desperate for approval. But my mom didn't even look at me. She stabbed her fork into a carrot and said, "That's nice, dear. But don't you think it's time you got a real job? You're not getting any younger." My dad nodded without missing a beat. The air left my lungs. I stared at them, waiting for someone, anyone, to say they were proud, to ask even one question, to show they cared even a little. Instead, Emma chimed in with her sweet, condescending tone. "If you want something stable, I can probably get you an entry-level position at my firm. They're always hiring. Reception or admin work might be a good fit." She said it like she was offering a lifeline, like she wasn't pushing my head underwater. I felt my throat closing, my chest tightening, my vision blurring around the edges as humiliation pressed against my ribs. I whispered, "This is a real job." My mom let out a soft sigh, the kind you make when a toddler insists on something silly. "Riley, sweetheart, art is nice, but it's not a future. You need something practical, something stable, like your sister." Emma smiled like she'd won something. My hands shook under the table. I tried again, voice cracking. "It is a future. I've been working hard. This could open doors." But my dad cut me off. "Stop being dramatic. Your sister is just trying to help." There it was, the sentence they always use to shut me down. My stomach twisted. My skin felt too tight. A hot, buzzing rage crawled up my throat. Not loud, not explosive, but deep and suffocating. I pushed back my chair. It scraped sharply against the tile. The room fell silent. I stood there, my breath trembling. "I'm tired," I said, voice shaking but steady. "I'm tired of being treated like I'm nothing. I'm tired of being compared to Emma. I'm tired of pretending this doesn't hurt." My mother blinked in shock. "Riley, you're overreacting." "No," I snapped, the word breaking out of me before I could stop it. "I'm not. I've spent my whole life trying to make you proud, and nothing I do is ever enough. I refuse to stay in a house where I'm treated like a disappointment." Emma rose from her seat, hands up like she was calming a wild animal. "Riley, just calm down. Don't make a scene." But I saw it, the smugness flickering behind her eyes. She wasn't calming me. She was enjoying this. Something inside me cracked open. A sound escaped me. Half laugh, half sob. "I'm moving out," I said, "tonight." Chaos erupted. My mom stood up, reaching for me. "Don't be ridiculous. You don't have the money." My dad's voice thundered. "You're being ungrateful. After everything we've done for you." Emma shook her head slowly, like I was a stubborn child. "You're being emotional, Riley. Sit down. You'll regret this." But I didn't sit down. I walked away, from the table, from their voices, from the years of being the lesser child, and I didn't look back until I reached the hallway. My suitcase was already half packed in my mind, and as I climbed the stairs to my room, their voices followed me. Angry, pleading, dismissive. But under all of it, under the panic and heartbreak, one feeling rose stronger than the rest. Relief. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. And nothing, not even their disappointment, could stop me. I don't remember climbing the stairs. I don't remember opening my bedroom door. It was like my body moved without me, guiding me through the motions while my mind buzzed with static. When the door clicked shut behind me, the silence hit me first. Thick, heavy. I exhaled shakily, leaning back against the frame as my heart pounded in my ears. Downstairs, my parents' voices were rising. My mom's frantic, my dad's furious, Emma's sharp and clipped as she tried to manage the situation. For a moment, guilt shot through my chest like a blade. Was I really doing this? Leaving home with nothing but a few $100s, a couple of freelance gigs, and a spine that had only just learned to stiffen? I closed my eyes. Something deep inside me whispered back, "Yes." The physical shock hits. My hand shook as I pulled my suitcase from the closet. My breath kept catching in my throat. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. Every shirt I folded felt like a confession. I wasn't just packing clothes. I was packing years of resentment, years of invisibility, years of swallowing my own voice. And the more I packed, the more the reality sank in. I was leaving because staying meant dying slowly. Under comparison, under dismissal, under Emma's shadow. But the fear was real too. My fingers trembled so hard I dropped a stack of sketchbooks. They fanned out across the floor like a timeline of every moment I had believed in myself. I knelt to gather them, running my hand over a worn cover. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. Art is a hobby, not a future. I swallowed the sting and whispered into the quiet room, I'm going to prove you wrong. The confrontation begins. A knock rattled my door. Riley, open up, my dad barked. I didn't answer. Another knock, this time soft, coaxing. Emma, of course. Riley, can we talk? I zipped my suitcase, ignoring her. Please, she insisted, voice smooth as ever. You're being dramatic. Come out so we can fix this. That word fix made something in me snap. I swung the door open so suddenly Emma flinched. She stood there in the hallway, arms crossed over her expensive blouse, lips pursed like she was trying very hard to look sympathetic. Behind her, my parents hovered, my mother wringing her hands, my father stiff with anger. Emma took a breath. Look, I know things get emotional for you. Stop, I cut in, my voice surprisingly steady. Just stop talking to me like I'm fragile or stupid. Her expression twitched. My mom stepped forward. Riley, sweetheart, you can't leave tonight. It's late. You need to think this through. You don't have steady income. You don't have a plan. I have more than you think, I replied. My dad scoffed. You have nothing. Don't fool yourself. That one hurt more than I expected. A flash of self-blame. For a moment, I faltered. What if they were right? What if I really was irresponsible? What if leaving was childish? What if I failed and proved them right all along? My throat tightened. I stared at the floor. My suitcase handle dug into my palm. I was afraid, terrified. And of all the people in the world, Emma was the one who saw that hesitation. She stepped closer, softening her voice. Riley, this is unnecessary. Come downstairs, finish dinner, and we'll talk about getting you back on track. I can still ask my firm about that admin position. Something inside me reignited. Back on track, as if my life were some derailed train in need of her perfect guidance. I lifted my eyes. No, I whispered. I'm not living like this anymore. The final push. My mom gasped quietly. My dad muttered something under his breath. Emma's expression shifted, sympathy sliding away, replaced by irritation. Then don't expect us to pick up the pieces when this inevitably falls apart. Her words were meant to scare me. Instead, they set me free. I grabbed my suitcase, brushing past her shoulder. Good, I said softly. I'm done giving you pieces of me anyway. The walk down the stairs. My mom followed me, pleading. My dad kept insisting I was making a stupid choice. Emma stayed silent, arms crossed, eyes cold. Each step felt like peeling myself away from a version of me I no longer wanted to be. At the bottom of the stairs, my mother grabbed my arm. Riley, if you leave, don't expect us to help you when you can't make rent. I met her eyes. I know. And for the first time in my life, the fear didn't stop me. It fueled me. Stepping out the door. When I pushed open the front door, a sharp breeze hit my face. It felt like the world inhaled for me when I couldn't. I rolled my suitcase to my car, the wheels thudding against the walkway. Behind me, silhouettes stood in the doorway. My father, angry. My mother, crying. Emma, smug, satisfied, untouchable. But as I put the key into the ignition, I felt something unexpected rise in my chest. Not dread, not guilt, not regret. Hope. Hope for a life where I wasn't compared, dismissed, or belittled. Hope for a version of myself I hadn't met yet, but desperately wanted to. Leaving home felt like slamming a door shut on the past, but I didn't know yet that leaving would ignite a storm I'd have to walk through barefoot. Moving out wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of a long unraveling. Of family ties, of loyalties, of everything I had once believed about who I was. The first weeks of survival. The night I left, I crashed on my friend Leah's couch. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a blanket and whispered, "If they made you leave, you were right to go." But alone in the dark, I wasn't so sure. I kept replaying my parents' words, my dad's disappointment, my mom's warnings, Emma's cold, cutting certainty that my life was destined to fail. I cried quietly into the pillow, feeling childish and brave and terrified all at once. But morning came, and with it, resolve. Leah helped me scour rental listings. We toured awful apartments with peeling paint, noisy pipes, and closets the size of a coffin. But after a week of couch sleeping and job hunting, I signed a lease on a tiny studio with creaky floors and a window that barely opened. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first night in that room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the faint smell of someone else's old cooking oil, I sat on the floor and whispered, "I can do this," and I believed it just enough to stay. Working 2 jobs, wearing one exhausted body. To make rent, I picked up a part-time job at a coffee shop while juggling the children's book illustration project. My days blurred into a rhythm. Open the shop, steam milk, clean counters, walk home, draw until my fingers cramped, fall asleep with my cheek on my sketch pad. Some nights I cried from exhaustion, others from loneliness, but every morning I got up again. Because even through the exhaustion, something inside me glowed faintly. I was finally building something of my own. And then my family started calling. At first, I ignored the calls. Voicemails piled up. My mother's desperate pleading. Riley, we're worried. Please come home. My father's anger. You made your point. Now stop being childish. Emma's syrupy condescension. You're embarrassing yourself. Just apologize. But underneath all 3 tones, the message was the same. You weren't supposed to leave. You were supposed to stay small. Every voicemail tightened the knot in my chest. Every message reminded me of who I used to be, and who I refused to be anymore. Still, the guilt was sharp. I cried in the bathroom between shifts. I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Family friends enter the battlefield. It wasn't long before family friends chimed in. Aunt Linda texted, "Your mother says you're going through a phase." Mr. Thompson emailed me, "Your parents are heartbroken. Why can't you appreciate what they've done?" Even my childhood piano teacher wrote, "Emma is just worried about you." Worried, right. They weren't worried. They were uncomfortable. Because a scapegoat walking away leaves everyone else exposed. Success arrives quietly, then loudly. 2 months in, something unbelievable happened. The children's book I illustrated went viral. A parenting blogger posted about it. Then another. Then a small publishing house emailed, asking if I'd consider illustrating 2 more books. I stared at the screen for a full minute before bursting into tears. For the first time, my dream felt real. I quit the coffee shop job 2 weeks later, bought real art supplies, turned half my studio into a workspace. And each time an invoice got paid, each time a new opportunity arrived, a tiny part of me healed. But with my success came escalation. Emma shows up, and she doesn't come alone. It was a rainy Tuesday. I was in my studio surrounded by paint tubes and sketches when someone knocked. I opened the door to find Emma standing there in a long black coat, her hair perfectly styled despite the weather. She stepped inside without being invited, scanning my little apartment like she was appraising a thrift store. "This is cozy," she said, which was Emma speak for pathetic. I forced a smile. "What do you want, Emma?" She sat on the edge of my only chair, crossing her legs. "I'm here because Mom and Dad are worried. They're not sleeping. You hurt them, Riley. They don't understand why you're acting like this." Acting like this. Leaving. Protecting myself. Trying to grow. Acting like this. I swallowed hard. They didn't leave me much choice. Emma scoffed softly. "You're being dramatic. You left over nothing. You could have had a stable job by now if you'd listened to me." I said nothing. I just held her gaze. She glanced at my desk, at the children's book copies, the artwork drawing on the wall. "This is cute," she said. "But you know it's not sustainable. You need real security." Something inside me, fragile, hard-won, cracked. I stood straighter, stronger. "I'm supporting myself," I said, "completely. Can you?" Her face changed. A flicker of something sharp crossed her expression. She stood suddenly, grabbing her purse. "You're ungrateful, selfish. You're breaking Mom and Dad's hearts. Don't come begging us for help when this little art phase collapses." She walked to the door, turned back. "Honestly, Riley, we expected better from you." And then she left. The door clicked shut, and for the first time in my life, I didn't believe her. The fire inside me begins to grow. After that visit, something shifted. My work got bolder. My confidence grew roots. I started networking with other illustrators. I built an online portfolio. I began therapy because I needed to understand why I had spent so many years shrinking. The more I healed, the clearer everything became. My family didn't hate my art. They hated that they couldn't control me anymore. But the real escalation was still coming, because soon Emma would fall, hard, and my family, so certain of who their daughters were, would realize they never truly knew either of us. And that realization would shatter everything. If healing were linear, the next chapter of my life would have been easy. Success building on success, confidence rising, family learning to respect boundaries. But healing isn't a straight line. It's a loop, a spiral. Some days you climb. Some days you fall through your own cracks. And my deepest fall didn't come from failure. It came from the people who were supposed to love me. The beige night everything caved in. It happened about a month after Emma's unwelcome visit. I'd just finished sending revisions for a magazine commission, my biggest paycheck yet, and I let myself celebrate with cheap takeout and an old blanket on the floor. I was exhausted, but content. Then my phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemails from my parents again. Then a text. Dad, answer your phone. We need to talk about your sister. Something cold slid down my spine. I hesitated, staring at the phone as if it were a bomb. Finally, I pressed play on the voicemail. My mother's voice was thick, frantic. Riley, please, we need you. Something's happened with Emma. Call us back. The fear hit me so hard my lungs locked. For all the pain, all the resentment, all the history, Emma was still my sister. My hand shook as I called back. When my mother answered, she was crying so hard she could barely speak. My father took the phone from her. She's been fired, he said bluntly, his voice cracked in a way I'd never heard. Fired? Emma? The golden child? The one who never made mistakes? He continued. They caught her falsifying billable hours, overcharging clients. They escorted her out of the building. My breath left my body, slow and painful. I didn't know how to feel. Shock, concern, disbelief, something darker. Years of being compared to her collided with this sudden collapse of her perfection. And then my father said the part that sliced me open. We need you to come home and help us fix this. Please, your mother is falling apart. Fix this. Fix them. Fix Emma. And suddenly every wound I carried began bleeding at once. The breakdown I didn't see coming. After hanging up, I sat in the middle of my studio, surrounded by paper, pencils, paint, and felt the world tilt off its axis. How predictable. How cruelly predictable that even in Emma's downfall, I was the one expected to step in, to bandage, to soothe, to sacrifice myself. Tears pricked my eyes, then spilled over uncontrollably. I cried so hard my body shook. It wasn't just about Emma losing her job. It was the realization that no matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I fought to build myself, my family still saw me as the backup daughter, the emotional mule, the one who existed to make their lives easier. I whispered into the empty room, "Why isn't my pain ever enough? Why am I never enough?" The silence answered back, "Because they never wanted you to be." The fear of becoming them. For the first time since leaving home, doubt crushed me like a tidal wave. What if they were right about me? What if my success was temporary? What if Emma's downfall meant I needed to step back into the role I'd abandoned? The old voice, my mother's, slithered into my mind. Art isn't a real career, Riley. The old voice, Emma's, whispered, "This is just a phase." The old voice, my father's, boomed, "You have nothing." And for a terrifying moment, I believed them. I curled up on the floor, arms around my knees, shaking. The fear was suffocating. I had built a fragile new life, but what if I shattered too? What if I was running from responsibilities they were right to expect of me? What if I deserved the role they'd written for me? A call I shouldn't have answered. My phone buzzed again. Emma! I stared at her name on the screen, my heart thrashing. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was sharp, brittle, nothing like the polished sister I knew. "I hope you're happy," she spat. My breath caught. "Emma, I just heard—" "Of course you did. Mom probably sobbed into the phone, right? They're acting like I'm the disappointment now, like you were right to leave." The venom in her tone froze me. She continued, voice rising. "This is your fault. You left. You made everything harder. You made them question me. You ruined the family dynamic." My throat tightened. "Emma, stop. Your job—" "Don't talk about my job," she screamed. "You don't understand anything. You've never had real responsibilities. You run away every time things get hard. And now you get to sit there in your little apartment acting like you're better than us?" I felt my chest cave inward. "I never said I was—" "You should have stayed home. You should have helped. That's what daughters do. But you were so desperate for attention, you abandoned us." Her words hit harder than any insult she'd ever thrown. And then softly, dangerously, she added, "Don't bother trying to contact me again. I don't want anything from you." The call ended. And something inside me ended too. The loneliest night of my life. I didn't move for a long time. Just sat on the floor in a room that suddenly felt too dark and too small and too full of ghosts. My family was falling apart. My sister hated me. I was alone, completely alone. And the saddest part? If I returned home, they would welcome Emma with open arms, but only welcome me if it meant cleaning up her mess. That night I realized the truth. I had never been a daughter to them, only a role, a tool, a comparison, a disappointment they could use to praise Emma. And without her perfection upholding the family narrative, my existence had become even more inconvenient. The ache in my chest was unbearable. It was the darkest moment of my life. Rock bottom. But what I didn't know yet what I couldn't possibly imagine was that rock bottom is where you finally see what you're standing on. And for the first time ever, it wasn't them. Dark moments don't announce their end. There's no sunrise cue, no dramatic music, no hand on your shoulder telling you it's time to get up. For me, the turning point came quietly, through a truth I wasn't looking for, from a person I never expected to hear it from. But it changed everything. The morning after breaking, I woke up on the floor, stiff and disoriented, my cheek pressed against a sketchbook page. The charcoal had smudged under my skin, a black streak across my jaw that felt painfully symbolic. My phone was silent, no calls from Emma, no messages from my parents. For the first time since leaving home, no one wanted anything from me. I made coffee with shaking hands, sat at my tiny table, and stared at my half-finished illustration. But the lines blurred. My mind was too loud. My parents wanted me back, not because they missed me, but because Emma's downfall had shattered the family narrative. Emma blamed me for everything because blaming herself was impossible. And I was drowning in guilt that wasn't mine. As I sat there, exhausted, empty, barely functioning, a knock sounded at my door. I almost didn't answer. But when I did, I found someone I never expected to see. Mrs. Alvarez, my high school art teacher, a voice from the past, carrying the truth I needed. She stood in the hallway holding a small tote bag and wearing that same warm cardigan she'd worn for years, the one she always said made her feel wrapped in creativity. "Hi, mija," she said softly. "Your mother called me. She said you were struggling." I nearly laughed. Of course my mother had reached out to someone, but not to help me, to control the narrative. Mrs. Alvarez stepped inside, set down her bag, and looked around my studio apartment with quiet admiration. "You have your own space," she said, smiling. "I'm proud of you." I felt my throat tighten. She gestured to the floor. "May I sit?" We sat cross-legged on the rug, just like old times when she'd critique my work after school. Then she said something that cracked my world open. "Your mother didn't call because she's worried about you. She called because Emma has fallen, and they expected you to hold everything together, but that has never been your job." I stared at her, stunned. She reached over, taking one of my trembling hands in hers. "Riley, mija, your family built an identity around Emma being the perfect one and you being the difficult one. That's how they made sense of their world, but that identity was never true. Not then, not now." My eyes filled instantly. She continued, voice gentle but unwavering. "Your success threatens their story, your strength threatens it, your independence threatens it, but none of that is your fault." I cried, ugly, broken sobs that racked my body, and she held my hand until I could breathe again. The realization that changed everything. When the tears faded, she asked, "Mija, what do you want?" Not what my parents wanted, not what Emma expected, not what I thought I owed anyone. Me. Just me. No one had ever asked me that before, and without thinking, I whispered, "I want a life where I don't disappear." Mrs. Alvarez smiled, small but proud. "Then stop shrinking for people who refuse to see you." Something inside me shifted, a weight loosened, a voice, my voice, got louder. In that moment, I realized I wasn't responsible for Emma's collapse. I wasn't responsible for my parents' disappointment. I wasn't responsible for fixing anyone. I was only responsible for myself. And choosing myself wasn't betrayal. It was survival, the evidence that sealed my resolve. Before she left, Mrs. Alvarez reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. "I thought you should see this." Inside were printed screenshots, public posts from industry forums, shared by legal professionals discussing Emma's case. Details I hadn't known, details my parents hadn't told me. Emma hadn't made one mistake. She'd fabricated dozens of hours, manipulated billing records, intentionally padded cases to inflate her value. This wasn't pressure. This wasn't one slip. This was a pattern. A choice. A lie she'd built her entire image on. A lie my parents had worshipped. I felt my breath steady for the first time in days. The truth hit me hard. Emma hadn't fallen because I left. She'd fallen because the pedestal they'd put her on was built on sand. And suddenly, I wasn't drowning anymore. The decision that ended the old version of me. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and drafted an email to my parents. Not cruel, not emotional, not apologetic. Clear, firm, true. I told them I loved them. I told them I was safe. I told them I was building a life I was proud of. But I also told them I would not return home. I would not fix Emma. I would not be their emotional crutch. And I would only rebuild a relationship with them slowly, on equal footing, with boundaries that would be respected. Before hitting send, I read it aloud. My voice didn't shake. When I clicked the button, a deep calm settled into my bones. For the first time in my entire life, I had chosen myself without apology. And that choice was the beginning of everything that came next. Fallout isn't loud at first. It's quiet, creeping, inevitable, like cracks spreading through glass before it shatters. When I sent that email to my parents, I expected rage. I expected guilt trips, manipulation, dramatic messages meant to pull me back into the role I'd abandoned. What I didn't expect was silence, a heavy, echoing silence that lasted 3 full days. And in that silence, something remarkable happened. My world stayed intact. Theirs didn't. The email that set everything on fire. On the 4th day, my father finally replied. A short, clipped message. We're disappointed. We'll talk when you've come to your senses. No love. No, we understand. Not even my name. My mother sent her own version. Emma is suffering. Family comes first. You should be here. Translation. Your worth is tied to what you can do for us. And Emma? Emma didn't reply at all. But that silence, her silence, spoke louder than any insult she'd ever thrown. For the first time, I saw clearly. Their love had always been conditional. Their approval had always been contingent. Their affection had always been transactional. But I had stepped out of that economy, and now they were the ones left scrambling. The crumbling of the golden child narrative. Through mutual acquaintances, old neighbors, family friends, a cousin who still stalked Emma's social media, I began to hear what was happening back home. Emma wasn't handling her downfall quietly. She was spiraling. 1. She'd been blacklisted by multiple firms. The legal world was small and word traveled fast. Her reputation as dishonest with billing followed her everywhere. 2. She had racked up massive debt. High-rise living, luxury everything, constant travel, designer clothes, all funded by a salary she no longer had, and parents who no longer had the savings to support her. 3. She was lashing out at everyone. Friends, colleagues, our parents. Apparently, she'd screamed at my mother for not fixing things, blamed my father for making her go into law, and accused both of ruining her life. The golden child was cracking, and with every crack, more truth leaked out. My parents' world begins to collapse. All their lives, my parents had balanced their identity on Emma's success. She was their trophy, their mirror, their proof they'd done something right. And now that mirror had shattered. Suddenly, the daughter they'd dismissed, the one they'd ignored, minimized, patronized, was thriving. And they didn't know how to cope. When neighbors asked about me, they started fumbling their words. When friends asked about Emma, they changed the subject. When extended family called, the embarrassment seeped through the phone lines. The pedestal they'd built for Emma had crumbled, and the hole where I used to stand was now too empty for comfort. Their desperation turns toward me. 2 weeks later, they showed up at my apartment building. I only knew because the property manager called. There's a couple down here saying you're their daughter, he said carefully. They seem upset. My stomach dropped. I peeked out the window, and there they were. My mother wringing her hands, red-eyed, my father pacing, tight-jawed and exhausted. They looked smaller than I remembered, older, fragile. But I didn't go down. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I had finally learned something important. People who only show up when they need you aren't showing up for you. I texted my father. I'm not ready to meet. Please respect my space. He responded, This is ridiculous. Families don't ignore each other. I stared at that message for a long time. They had ignored me for 25 years. The truth comes out from someone unexpected. A week later, my mother called again, but this time she left a voicemail unlike any I'd heard from her before. Her voice cracked. She apologized. Not perfectly, not fully, not without excuses, but it was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever received. She admitted they'd been too hard on me, too focused on Emma, too blind to how their favoritism had damaged both of us. Then she said something that broke me open. We built Emma up so high that she never learned how to stand on solid ground, and we pushed you down so far that you learned to climb alone. We're paying the price for both mistakes. I cried, softly, quietly, not from pain this time, but from release. Because for the first time, they were seeing the truth. Emma's downfall reaches its peak. Right around this time, I got one last update from a cousin. Emma had moved out of her apartment in the middle of the night. Eviction papers had been placed on her door. She wasn't answering calls. She'd cut off everyone, including our parents. And she'd left a final message in the family group chat before disappearing. This family only loved me when I performed. When I needed help, you all failed me. Don't contact me again. My parents were devastated, shaken, confused. All these years, they thought they'd been raising a star. But they had been raising someone who couldn't live without applause, because she'd never learned how to be simply human. And in the wreckage of their perfect daughter, they finally looked for the daughter they'd overlooked. Me, the daughter who had built something real, something stable, something grounded in truth, not performance, something earned, not given. For the first time in their lives, they needed me more than they needed Emma. But here's the twist they never saw coming. I didn't need them back. Not for validation, not for identity, not for survival. I had already created a life without them, and it was stronger than anything they'd ever offered me. And that was their fallout. A quiet, painful, inevitable unraveling of a narrative they'd clung to for decades. Walking away without anger. I didn't slam the door on them. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't celebrate their pain. I simply kept living my life. Drawing, working, growing, healing. Every step forward made the past smaller behind me. When I finally agreed to meet with my parents weeks later, I walked into the cafe, calm, steady, grounded. And for the first time ever, they looked at me with respect. Not pity, not disappointment, not condescension. Respect. Because the truth had done what I never could. It forced them to see me. If you had told me at 25, standing on that driveway with a suitcase and a breaking heart, that one day I would be grateful for everything that happened, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, leaving felt like jumping off a cliff. Now I know it was the first time I learned how to fly. 1 year later, a life that's finally mine. My studio apartment became a bigger apartment. That bigger apartment became a real workspace. Sunlit, messy, full of canvases and bright splashes of color that used to exist only inside my imagination. My art career didn't just survive, it flourished. The children's book series gained momentum. Then came magazine covers. Then advertising commissions. Then invitations to speak at schools, to mentor young artists, to show my work in local galleries. I built a community, not of blood, but of choice. Other illustrators, writers, creatives, friends who saw me, valued me, believed in me before I fully believed in myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the shadow. I wasn't the afterthought. I was exactly who I was meant to be. And my parents? Healing didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen neatly. It didn't happen without setbacks. But little by little, they changed. They apologized, not perfectly, but sincerely. They listened, awkwardly at first, then with genuine interest. They stopped comparing. They stopped dismissing. They started asking questions that showed they were trying to understand me, not reshape me. They visited my new studio and looked at my work with real pride in their eyes. My mother even cried, not from disappointment this time, but from something softer, something real. We didn't become a perfect family, but we became an honest one. And sometimes honesty is the best kind of healing. And Emma? She disappeared for a while. No calls, no messages, no updates. Until one day, a simple email arrived. I'm okay. Please don't worry about me. No anger, no blame, no apology either. Just distance, a boundary I chose to respect. Because I finally understood something important. My sister's downfall was not my responsibility. Her healing is not my duty. Her choices are not my burden. I hope she finds a life that fits her, not the pedestal our parents built. But her journey is hers alone. And for the first time ever, I'm not living in her shadow. The real twist, the one I never saw coming. Walking away from my family didn't destroy me. It rebuilt me. I learned that love without respect is a trap. That acceptance built on conditions is a cage. That chasing approval is a race you can never win. I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappoint the people who expect you to be small. Because that disappointment, that rupture, that breaking, it creates space for your real life to grow. The lesson for anyone listening, to the black sheep, to the quieter sibling, to the child who was told they weren't enough, to the person who loves something impractical, to the one who leaves because staying hurts too much. This is for you. Your worth is not measured against anyone else. Your dreams are not foolish. Your softness is not weakness. Your difference is not a flaw. And walking away from people who refuse to see you is not betrayal. It is self-respect. If you are scared, go anyway. If you feel small, build slowly. If you feel alone, remember, solitude is temporary, but becoming yourself lasts forever. I used to believe I was the disappointing child. Now, I know better. I'm the daughter who saved herself, and I wouldn't trade that version of me for anything.